Well, hello, welcome back. I'm 𝗣𝗶𝗱 𝗔𝗳𝗃. In this video, we'll be covering a 50-hour, 1-year review of my Rippa R319 mini excavator. Keep in mind, this video is a 100% self-sponsored review. 100% paid out of pocket from me, so keep that in mind. Nobody's paying me to make it. In this video, we'll be covering basically the good and bad about this machine, my personal feeling on that, and we'll be going over a lot of examples of what you can actually get done with a 1-ton mini. So enjoy the review. So one other thing I want to mention, whether you're getting a Rippa like this machine or you have your eye set on another machine you've been doing a lot of research on, this video is going to cover a bunch of work over the last year so you can see real jobs of these machines. Now, I'm not just going to sit around, talk around the machine and walk around it the whole time. Throughout the whole entire video, you're going to see this thing being used for the 50 hours and what you can actually expect to get done with these. And I have to tell you, man, they are small, but they are a workhorse and they are a back saver. Very efficient on fuel, and you can get a lot of work done. So enjoy the video. So let's start off with the good on this machine. It's been super reliable for the last 50 hours. I've had almost no problems with it when it comes to hydraulics or engine, anything like that. I've had a little problem with the bucket we'll get into in the bad, but it was a pretty easy problem to remedy. For the last 50 hours, it's been good. It's priced basically the cost of a 0-turn riding lawnmower from like Home Depot or something. So it's not breaking the bank for something like this. I have a bad back, and having something like this around to save me from lifting odd things and stuff like that, it's just saving me a lot of work, especially shovel work. I've been possibly dealing with a bit of a hernia too, so I'm trying to keep that from getting any worse. If you got any body issues and you might be considering getting a machine like this, definitely well worth the cost for it. It's super small. Some people think that's a really downside to it. It can be if you really got big jobs, but you got to be realistic about what the jobs are you want to do with a machine this size. For really small, one thing about it is like it's compact enough you can fit in the back. I hauled my 3/4 ton Ford. You can haul it on a small trailer behind you very easily. You can get in behind buildings and tight places and backyards. So being compact, you got to kind of pick the machine for the job. But later in the video, you see how much stuff you can actually get done with it. Living out here in the Pacific Northwest, even in the summer, I've never seen the hydraulic oil get over 125 degrees Fahrenheit. This one does not have an oil cooler. If you live in a hotter climate, that could be an issue. But again, working it for a few hours at a time, I've never seen the oil get very hot at all on the hydraulics. Some other minis, they'll get scorching hot where you have a limited amount of time to run. The hydraulic thumb has been awesome. I would not buy one of these machines without a hydraulic thumb. I think that's a crucial thing, especially one that folds up all the way up and out of the way. Some hydraulic thumbs only move down to a certain point and only fold up so far, so you can actually hit them when you're digging in the dirt a lot. This one folds up completely out of the way. That was one big reason. I wouldn't even consider buying one of these little minis without a hydraulic thumb on them. And honestly, between the stock bucket that came with it and the hydraulics thumb, that's basically 90% of the attachments I use on here. I have a Rippa, I have a grapple, and I have a tilting bucket and a few others. But honestly, that stock bucket and hydraulic thumb is so useful for moving brush, dirt, digging out stumps, just brushing things like crazy. It's so useful around the mill too, loading logs. The single cylinder engine's been quite reliable. It's just a Briggs & Stratton 13.5 horse. It's got plenty of power. Even I run it most of the time at 1/3 to half throttle because it's got plenty of power to do all the jobs I need to, and it smooths the machine out quite a bit running at that RPM. So yeah, you don't really have to run them full bore. I wouldn't say having a bigger engine would make this thing any better, and it's simply just super fuel efficient. And if you really need another engine for one of these machines, Harbor Freight sells the 420cc engine for like $350, so pretty simple. I'd say that's some of the simplicity and the good with this machine. It's just basic, easy to work on. Next, we'll jump over to the bad. So the bad, there's really not much to complain about this machine over the last 50 hours and a year of use. I would say the biggest issue I've actually had with it, it was pretty minor, was the sidewalls of the bucket were pretty thin and they started to flare out from curling the bucket onto some bigger river rock and things and just kind of working it. I think it was only like 1/8 inch wall. So I did a video on how I repaired the bucket, basically bent it back into shape and welded some 3/16 plate on the side. Put a little link to that video down below if you want to see some fabrication on that. And that was basically the biggest problem I had with the machine in the last year. So with that bucket problem out of the way, only thing else I'm going to talk about here is things that I would like to see the company get better at, or things I wish I would have known going into it. And one is, after riding this thing around on my property and doing dirt work with it, I realized it's pretty narrow. I knew that going into it, but you don't realize until you actually run one how narrow they are. And I really should have got an expandable track model. I contemplated that at the time of buying it, but I didn't know the build quality of the machine. Didn't want to spend another $1,500 on that option. Now I know it's probably would have been worth it for my hilly property. Another thing is there's no ROPS. Knew that going into it, but this 2-post design is pretty weak. Shakes around a lot when you're driving it, and that's why I unbolted it for a while and also get in my shop. But I would like them to see like do a 4-post design or like legit ROPS on this thing. It's a little rollover protection. So another thing I don't care for that much, but I made do with, was the fuel tank is under the seat. So you have to just spin off some wing nuts and lift the seat off every time you want to fill it. Luckily, it holds like 1.5 gallons or a little more, and it's pretty fuel efficient, so you don't have to fill it up that often. But that's kind of a not awesome feature to have it stuck under the seat. Another thing is the rear cover has to be unbolted to get to the engine. It's awkward to check the oil through the seat area, so you have to unbolt that. Again, it doesn't burn much oil, so I'm not checking that often, but it would be nice to see them put a cover that's swingable out of the way. I think it's pretty easy to mod, but again, these are some things I think they have upgraded in a future model. One other thing I think they should have included was a counterweight with this machine. I put about 60 pounds of metal in the engine bay, and it maybe helped a little bit. It's hard to say, but I think a few hundred pounds of counterweight on the back of the machine would have made a big difference. And you can find counterweights and you can order them for them, or you can just cut some 1/2 inch or 1 inch steel. But I never really got around to cutting any steel for this thing. I just bolted some steel plates I had kicking around and called it good. But if they would have included a counterweight, would have been nice. The other thing is operating the blade and hydraulic thumb. On my model specifically, they're all levers on the dash, and it got a little cramp for the controls. All these things are something they, I think, have remedying on a future model. But after owning this thing for a year, these aren't real deal breakers for me, and I'm still happy with this machine. So there's a new model coming out. I haven't got to operate one yet, but it looks like Rippa remedied most of those complaints I have. Not all, but most of them. They also include an oil cooler, which is a really nice feature. We'll cover a bunch of photos at the end of the video, and I'll talk about that new model. Haven't got to operate one yet, but I'm pretty interested in picking one up possibly. Now we're going to go over in detail kind of some of the jobs you can expect to get done with a small 1-ton machine. This is considered 1 ton. A lot of them on the market and auctions are all 1 tons, and they differ a little bit. Some are a little heavier, some are a little lighter. This is actually 1,800 pounds, so it's shy of 200 pounds of a ton. But anyways, you can actually expect to get like little stumps and things like that pulled in small trees. Don't expect to be pulling a 2-foot diameter tree stump out unless it's really rotten. It's been there for a long time. If it's a green tree you just cut down, you're going to beat the machine up. It's not worth it. But you know, tiny stumps, 6-8 inches across, you're going to be able to pop out pretty easy with a machine like this. Other projects you can expect to be able to do is digging drainage ditches, sculpting your land for better drainage. You can work on digging power and water lines in the ground as long as you don't have major amounts of rock. I mean, it'll get around some of that stuff. Digging footings for buildings, things like that. It's all pretty capable machine. You can always get a narrower bucket if you want to cut narrower trenches and things like that. Wider buckets, probably not recommended for heavy trenching, but for moving softer soils, you can get 2-foot wide buckets, 2.5-foot wide buckets for compost, soil, bark, things like that. You can actually do quite a bit of terracing with the machine this small. I have a lot of hillside property, so I'm constantly cutting into the hillside embankments, and traveling the dirt with either just traveling it with the bucket from front of the machine to behind the machine, making big piles, or just using the blade to push it around. But there's a little bit of work. You can do quite a bit of terracing. Sometimes in the summer evenings after I get home from work, after dinner and hanging out with the kids, I'll go up for a little while, pick away at a hillside for about an hour. And if you just do that throughout the week, you can get quite a bit of dirt moved with one of these little machines. Definitely a back saver. Well, got a nice soft pile of dirt loosened up off this embankment. This stuff has just been, as you can see, chunky, shaly rock. All this stuff embedded, especially towards the bottom here, but I've been breaking it up pretty well. And have a bunch of dirt here. I would say probably 3 yards maybe loosened up here, and I can start moving that over there, terrace that out, and make a little drive kind of where I pulled that cedar down. I can drive right through. You can get some smaller gravel jobs going. I wouldn't expect to try to regrade a whole driveway if you had a 1/4 mile long driveway or anything massive like that. But if you're working on a small parking spot and have to spread a few yards of gravel, it's pretty easy to do with one of these machines. It's great for small paths, spreading gravel down paths, because you know it's narrower than a quad, so you can make garden paths, things like that. If you're going to be spreading a lot of gravel, like we're talking a semi-truck load, 10 yards or something, I recommend 5/8 minus, because it doesn't get into the tracks as bad and cause a problem between the rollers and the sprockets and the track, all that kind of stuff. I had about 5 yards of gravel to spread, and it was 1¼ inch minus. So anything like 1¼ inch, 2 inch, that kind of big stuff posed a big problem to get pulled up on the tracks when, even if you just slowly turn, not like skid steer turn, it will get up in there, and if it gets between the front idler rollers or the back sprocket, you can actually crack rocks or really tension the tracks quite tight. So keep that in mind. If you're going to do a lot of gravel work, the smaller gravel is much better, because it can kind of push through the little reliefs in the track openings. Another really nifty thing, if you're spreading gravel or topsoil and you don't really want to travel through a bunch of really deep gravel with these tracks, is grab yourself a piece of I-beam and clamp it between your hydraulic thumb and the bucket. You can do a lot of grading with that. It's like having basically a blade at the end of your bucket there, and you can manipulate it to angle ground by setting it down on angle ground and clamping it again. But it's a really helpful tool, and it's one of those attachments that are basically free if you find a chunk of I-beam in a scrap pile. So I want to just take a moment and say, if you're enjoying the video, you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Give it a thumbs up. Leave a nice comment down below if you'd like to. And also, one thing I've just implemented recently is I got to buy me a coffee down in the description, and I'll have it pinned at the top of the comments. And I added that to the last video on the skid steer, and I have to say, the 7 people that bought me a coffee, that made a big difference. I really, really want to thank you. I wrote you back each a personal message, so thanks a lot. Another way I really like to use this mini excavator is for heavy duty weeding. I had a garden that kind of got out of control, especially around some fruit trees, and I got in there with this machine. I probably work really good with the landscaping rakes they sell, but I just use a stock bucket and thumb, and you could really rake through the ground and get a bunch of bushes and brush and just clean up things very easily. You can do what would take you all day to do by hand, and you'd be burned out with a shovel and hurting your back. You can get stuff done in like maybe a half an hour's worth of work with this machine. The amount of power and agility with that thumb and bucket, it's pretty awesome. Probably one of the best uses for me, especially saving my back with one of these machines, is for processing and cutting up firewood. You know, I have a wood stove for my main source of heat in my place, so it's always throughout the year, whenever I get a chance to cut up firewood, I will. And you can just grab the logs, lift them off the ground to a comfortable height, not getting your chainsaw blade in the dirt, you're not leaning over. You can cut it at waist height and just hold the log in the air and work the log down. And then if you got really large log rounds, you can use the machine. I use it a lot, where like I could pick up a 60-70 pound log and put it on the log splitter, don't really want to. So you just set it on the machine, load a few of them, split them in half so they're more manageable size. And even when you're done, I've used this thing for just picking up large quantities of firewood and loading up my articulated dump truck or a pickup truck. So super helpful. I don't usually have much help with processing firewood, so if I'm going to do it, might as well save my back. Most of my subscribers know I have a sawmill I built from scratch about 10 years ago, and so I'm always moving logs around. It's a medium-sized mill, and these things are great for loading logs, medium-sized to small-sized logs. You're not going to lift something that's 18, 19 inches in diameter, that's 20 feet long out of the mill. You got to be realistic what you're going to load on it. You may only be able to load an 8-foot log if it's big enough and heavy enough, but I mill a lot of cedar. It's a little lighter, and this thing is great for picking up logs. No more using PVs to roll them up on the mill. The excavator is great for not only that, cleaning up your scrap pile of old cut-offs and cleaning up sawdust, and just super handy around the mill. So if you have a lot of rock on your property, this may be very useful for you. I don't have a bunch of rock in the ground around my place, just a bunch of like shaly hard pan clay. So I'll bring in some basalt rock for building rock walls and terracing and stuff on occasion. But this thing will lift up 1-man, 2-man rocks very easily. It's definitely a back saver for building rock walls. And it won't maybe lift a giant 2-man rock fully extended without being tippy, but big rock like that, there's no reason to keep it out that far. You can bring the arm in really close and keep it close to the machine. It won't be very tippy. But yeah, they are great for building rock walls. I have a bunch of rock wall work planned for this next summer around my place, and this is a go-to machine for me. I've also had people talk about just renting machines. It's cheaper in the long run. If you need a really big machine for a big project, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I find these things are super useful for is when you come home, you got something that's a few hundred pounds in the back of your truck and it's awkward to handle, you don't have any help, just fire up the Mini X, unload it with some lifting straps. Those are the jobs that I find that you really get a lot of use out of that save your back. Is just got a project, got no one around to help you. Man, it doesn't take much gas to run this thing. It's super efficient. And those are the little jobs of owning a machine, those quick 15, 20-minute jobs that really add up through the year, that you find how useful this machine really is. Well, there you go. That's how I've used this machine for the last 50 hours around my property for the last year. It's been a good machine, but Rippa is coming out with a new machine that actually has some of the options I really would like to have. So I think I'm going to be getting rid of this Rippa little R319 to a friend and probably be ordering the new R10 model. I'll put a link below where I ordered my machine from. The company's been pretty good out of Rippa, Texas, and I'll put a link to the R10. That machine that Rippa's selling now has a lot of cool features. We'll go over them next with a few photos so you can see what I'm talking about. And it seems like a pretty good model if I want to stick with the 1-ton size. I may consider a little bit heavier model and go with a Kubota diesel, but we'll see. Let's cover the R10 next. So to go over the R10, it doesn't sell for much more than I paid for my machine. It's got an expandable undercarriage, so wider track. You can narrow them up and widen them. It looks like it comes again with the hydraulic thumb. It also has a quick disconnect, a manual quick disconnect for taking off the bucket and switching out to other stuff. The hydraulic boom cylinder is on the back side, so you're not going to slam logs into it if you're using it to load logs in your mill. That cylinder is protected. It has pilot style controls. I highly doubt they are pilot controlled for the controlling the bucket and everything, but they're sitting alongside the seat rather than reaching towards the dash. Unfortunately, it's still a 2-post design. I don't like that sunshade setup, but I heard this machine has an oil cooler. Now, I've yet to see if it actually has an oil filter. My machine did, so I would think it would be weird if they took it off, but I can't quote it because I haven't seen any photos yet. But it does have an aluminum oil cooler with a fan. This is still a 13.5 horse engine. It's expandable track, like I said, so the blade, you can widen it as well. And it's also got a swing boom, so you can actually get it really close in along buildings. That's a super nice feature. There's a lot of good features. There's a few I'm missing here, but all in all, it looks like a pretty good machine. And if I stick with the 1-ton range, it's definitely something that's on my list. So at the end of the day, you gotta be pretty realistic about what you can and can't do with these little machines. You're only gonna be able to lift so much or dig such a big stump out of the ground. So they are just homeowner units, fairly small, very portable. You can see you can get quite a bit done. I've had a lot of people bash them because they're Chinese. I'm not doing commercial work with this thing, probably never will. Not to say you couldn't, but probably better machines out there to do that with. But for saving my back and my body around my property, it's definitely well worth the cost that I put out for it. So hope you enjoy the video. Until next time, goodbye.